is here in Pamplona and in the abandoned village of Egüés, where we will be in the next days. This event, the Summerschool Rurapolis, would never have been possible without the support, financial support and administrative support of the Architecture School of Versailles in France, where I am currently doing my investigation project under the name Rurapolis. It is the result of several months of work, of energy, of preparation, and I would like to thank, before we start this first lecture, I would like to thank the ÉNSA, the Architecture School of Versailles, but also the municipality of Pamplona, who is letting us use this wonderful space of the city of Condestable, and also the Ayuntamiento del Valle de Egüés, the city council of the Egüés Valle, where we will be in the next days in Egüés. Also, I want to thank the professional who are going to intervene in the summer school, and among others, Valle, who is there with us tonight. We will give a lecture about her projects, and we came from all the way from Rotterdam to make this presentation in the framework of the summer school. So I will now present very quickly the thematic of my investigation project of the Rurapolis before I leave the speech to Estelle. And I would say we do both presentations in a row, and after we feel that there are some questions, we can do all the questions all together, if it's okay for you. Y ahora igual hago una pequeña introducción en castellano, porque bueno, estamos en el contexto local, en euskera no hablo, pero me parece importante igual decir unas palabras en castellano. Creo que todo el mundo habla inglés, pero debido a la presencia de los estudiantes que acudieron al curso de verano a la Summerschool Rurapolis, estamos haciendo todas las charlas en inglés. Solo voy a resumir en principio la temática de la Summerschool en castellano. Entonces, este proceso de investigación que se puede ver aquí en esta exposición y en la cartografía, llamado Rurapolis, se ubica en la zona transfronteriza entre los Pirineos Atlánticos, el departamento francés, y Navarra en España, cogiendo también la parte norte de Aragón, que se puede ver en este mapa más grande aquí. El propósito de la investigación es que las ruinas rurales puedan servir como herramienta de formación territorial ante los retos climáticos y sociales a que nos enfrentamos o que nos esperan en las próximas décadas. En el marco de este proyecto, que tiene como punto de partida esta tesis doctoral que estoy desarrollando ahora dentro del laboratorio de investigación de la Escuela de Versailles, se creó con el apoyo de esta misma escuela, así que con el Ayuntamiento de Pamplona y del Valle de Egüés, durante unos días una Summerschool, una escuela de verano abierta a estudiantes internacionales que acudieron ahora de un poco todas partes, de Canadá, de Alemania, de Grecia, de Italia, igual no ha habido algunas partes. Y la idea es con ellos abrir una fuente de discusión alrededor de esta temática de investigación, de este territorio que vamos también a caminar. Mañana hacemos una caminata desde Salomé hasta Egüés, y también hacer un taller práctico, entonces poner en práctica esta investigación durante unos días en un taller de tapial de construcción en tierra apisonada con un experto en tierra cruda en el pueblo abandonado de Egüés. Y también tenemos charlas que involucran a personalidades reconocidas que se dedican a esta temática, como este barrio de esta noche. Al final de la estancia, entonces del taller en Egüés, el objeto arquitectónico que voy a enseñar ahora en esta pequeña charla, que está como construido colectivamente, acogerá un evento cultural en Egüés, una performance de la bailarina y coreógrafa Galina Rodríguez, que tendrá lugar el jueves 8 de septiembre, entonces una semana a las 8 de la tarde, y aquí estáis también invitados, que está abierto al público. Y la idea es después quedarse a dormir en el pueblo de Egüés, entonces estáis todos invitados si os interesa esta temática. Ahora voy a volver al idioma que tenemos tenemos que usar esta noche, entonces en inglés, para presentar un poco este proyecto de investigación. Okay, so it's really weird to start again with English, but I have to do it. So I launched this investigation project called Rurapolis about 1 year ago, last October, as a practice-led PhD. So I'm going to show here quickly the theoretical background about all of the projects before we start the field work in the next days with other students in the framework of this summer school. The idea of the Rurapolis came from a problematic, from a question that made its way during the last years, while I have been involved also in Pamplona in the project of ÉNSA Periferia, Rethinking the Periphery, which we developed together with a local studio here, architecture studio called Origami Studio in Pamplona. During the last 5 years, we have been working on the suburban areas of Pamplona, and this has brought us to put in question the limits of the city, of the metropolis. And the main concern that came out of this process is, I would say, if we have the right as architects, as urbanists, to continue to plan peripheral space like we can see in the surrounding of Pamplona, but also of other European metropolises, if we can continue to plan it like this, or at the contrary, if we should think about other development models, about not only in terms of settlements, but in terms of urbanism, but also in terms of construction, thinking about other way of more sustainable way of construction. So this is like the debating point of all the problematic of this project. The problematic of this very diffuse city, what we call in urbanistic terms the diffuse city, of the never-ending urban space, is a very actual one. According to a study from 2020, where you can see here the statistic, the soil occupation by city increased by an 80% between 1981 and 2015, which was also 4 times more than the initially predicted growing of the cities worldwide. We are speaking here of the cities worldwide. And the same study predicts now a 6-fold increase in global urban space by 2100. In this context, it would be very necessary to think about another model of city, one that is better adapted to current and future climatic and also social contingency. And many architects and urban planners are conscious of this problem right now. So it's a very contemporary thematic in the architecture, but also in the society in general. And just to make a quick, to show you very quickly the state of the art, we have here an example of the work of which is an Italian urbanist and professor at the PFL, the architecture school in Lausanne, in Switzerland. And in this study about the city of Geneva, which is the city nearby Lausanne, you can see how she and her studio and her team first analyzed the climatic evolution of this city, of this metropolis, before even propose a planning for the future of the city. Because this has been asked by the city of Geneva, which is located at the border between Switzerland and France, which is growing extremely, and they have a really big problem of organizing this territory, this transborder territory between Spain and France, and also to organize it around the Lac Léman, which is the lake in the middle of the city. So they started by making a climatic analysis of the city. And here you can see how they make a proposal, which I found very interesting for the Big Geneva. They propose that this area of the Big Geneva, which is actually now a very urbanized metropolis, could evolve in the future in order to adapt itself better to the climatic evolution, could evolve as a metropolis composed by villages. So to inject inside of the urban space the idea of rurality. Another example could be the work of Rurapolis. architect from Holland, which is also researching the Dutch architect, which is also researching on the problematic of rurality and countryside since a few years now. And he published in 2020 a report about his investigation. So we are speaking really about more scientific research he's making with the Columbia University. And this report has been exposed in form of an exhibition at the Guggenheim Museum in New York. So this example is really just to show how actual the problematic is in the urban planning debates. And here the last one from the state for the references, an interesting contribution made by Sébastien Marot, which is not an architect, not an urban planner, but a philosopher, who is very involved into architecture and urban planning. This project, which is entitled Taking the Country's Side, is a proposal, a very utopian proposal. He presented it in form of a fiction, where he developed 4 different scenarios for an invented metropolis of the future. So this proposal is a reflection about how the metropolis could look like in a more resilient way by respecting the condition of the countryside. If urban planning, instead of spreading itself from the city, would start from various rural points, like from different nodes, as you can see on this drawing, where you can see that communities come all together to form a kind of alternative metropolis. So this is the reflection of Sébastien Marot. And the idea behind that is that this kind of metropolis is more adapted to natural conditions. And now back to our context. The Rurapolis project focuses on the potential of rural ruins for future regional developments in a cross-border territory, encompassing the region of Navarre, the northern parts of Aragon, and on the Spanish side, and the Atlantic Pyrenees in France. So as you can see, the territorial division here on this map. And with Pamplona, where we are right now, in the old parts, Pamplona is the capital of Navarre, and this small metropolis alone counts for 50% of the total population of the region. And Pamplona is actually also experiencing a constant demographic and geographical growth. And on the other side, compared to Pamplona, like putting in mirror the rest of the territory with Pamplona, there is a regional phenomenon which is sadly affecting also other parts of Europe, but is very emblematic here in this region. In recent decades, this urban growth that we have right now in Pamplona has been accelerated by the rural exodus, by the industrialization of the region, and this industrialization and this rural exodus has shaped the territory. There has been a gradual shift from rural to urban areas, which is here in Navarre particularly pronounced. We have a total of 109 villages, like a study shows from 2020 from Juan José Pons, which is, I think, behind in the room, so I show it here. So a study he made with one of his students to analyze precisely the number of depopulated villages here in the region. So we have a total number of 109, and also a larger number, which you can see here the points in white, of villages which are in risk of depopulation. This criteria has been fixed in showing villages which are counting less than 25 inhabitants in 2020. And also, compared to this very sad phenomenon, we have also a movement which has been described since the decade of the 1970s with 1980s as a kind of neo-ruralism, and which is now questioning a large part of the society, where with the challenge of the climate change, and also more particularly since the beginning of the pandemic, renewed interest into the rural world, and this leads to a renewed interest for the rurality. And here in Navarra, we have since the 80s about 25 villages which have been reactivated. So they were formerly abandoned, and there have been a reactivation process that conduct to put them again into life. These cases of rural reactivation, of the reactivation of formerly abandoned villages, has been done in the most cases through a community reappropriation, so a group of people who put themselves together to reoccupy these villages, with the agreement and the support of the local authorities, and in some cases also not. These villages have been simply occupied, not so legally, and sometimes in some ways legalized after a while. Like the example for the ones who come from Pamplona-Iruña, which one of the most famous examples here in Navarra. And we'll see tomorrow the example of the reactivation of the village of Zorokai in the lecture of the Wackernagel studio. A book published in 2016 has caused much debate in Spain, and it established a specific terminology in the society. This terminology called La España Vacía, which is literally the empty Spain, has been developed by the journalist Sergio del Molino, and in this essay from 2016 he highlights two-split territory in a very maybe simple way, but makes it very understandable for the worldwide public. On the one hand, you would have the urban and kind of European Spain, as we describe it here, and on the other hand, you would have a depopulated Spain, which is the result, as he describes, among other things, of political and also infrastructural decisions that have constantly widened this gap between two realities. So not only the phenomenon of rural exodus and of industrialization, but also a series of political decisions that led also to this abandonment of really large part of the territory. And indeed, if you have a larger look on this map of Europe, you can see that not only Navarre, but large parts of the national territory, of the Spanish territory, are almost completely empty. You can see here in the center with some density in some parts of Spain, which are comparable with the level of Lapland, for example in Finland, if you compare it with the parts of Europe which are above on the map. So it's a very strong thematic that we have here in Spain. And now to come back to the climatic issue, if we have a closer look and we come back to Navarre, to this province in relation to its climatic evolution, we can see that there is a huge climate shift as it is expected in this current analysis based on the heat wave of the last year. So we are not even speaking of the heat wave we have now this summer. It's a calculation which has been made based on the last years. On this analysis, you can see that by 2050, the bioclimatic conditions of the Pyrenean area, so the mountain region between France and Spain, will step back from a high mountain biosphere to the one of a middle high mountain. And by 2080, the actual biosphere of the Pyrenean mountain will practically disappear if we follow this prediction, transforming itself into a huge hill, like a single hill, facing the climatic condition we have actually now around Pamplona, so on the flatter areas. These provisions, to my eyes, get us to the dialectic which always gets us out of the dialectic which always places rural and urban in opposition. Because now we have to try to think about this opposition between rural and urban, as architects, as urban planners, about an alternative territorial planning, and speak about the territory, forgot a little bit this dialectic and this opposition, and think about a proposal that is, to say, one which no longer develops from the historical territorial model that would start from the rural areas. Because it is hard to think that we are following this model since decades, which is represented here in this image, which is quite radical. You can see here another image from the Sotoriscaire neighborhood in Pamplona, which is growing out from the old part of the city, multiplying the suburbs and the suburban space quite to the infinite. And the basic idea of this Rurapolis project is to think about a post-urban space where we could live and breathe and also act regarding the climatic evolution. So by facing this matter of fact, as I referred to at the beginning of the presentation, the question we can ask ourselves is: could we not think about another model of city, one that is better adapted to the current and the future climatic and social conditions, and go out of the images we can see here of the recent suburban settlements constructed in the most radical way. So the Rurapolis is really, at this stage of the investigation, a hypothesis which can be put into the debate, hypothesis of territorial projects. It would be here, as it is represented in this map, a conglomerate of abandoned villages that are identified as potentialities on the territory. So this project proposal comes to be grafted onto the peripheral city. So in this context, the suburban areas of Pamplona and the existing villages around. So you can see in this cartography an analysis of the actual urban settlements and the actual villages and how they are connected with the actual road and train infrastructure to the abandoned villages, and what could be done with this situation, and what we could add to this situation, to this territory, in terms of construction, of infrastructure, and of settlement. So this Rurapolis would form a kind of additional layer, an additional stage, which offers another form of post-urban growth, more organic. That's why you can see here the representation, the idea of the lichen, of a kind of organic structure that comes to grow out from the territory. And this structure would be capable to anchor itself on the territory without, in this point very important, damaging its resources. The project methodology is based on a deep exploration of the suburban and rural territory, as you could see on this map, which is the map of the work we're going to do tomorrow with the students, tomorrow morning. So we're going to walk from the peripheral city of Salomé up to the abandoned village of Egüés, in order to understand really what are the constellations, the urban constellation from this big periphery until the village of Egüés. So the methodology really includes boundary also in the approach. This sensitive approach generates also an alternative cartography, which is closer to the ground. The abandoned villages, as you can see here, one example, or here another one, with the village of Egüés, would be reactivated in a rehabilitation scenario. So the idea would be really to propose a rehabilitation project of the existing structure of these houses on a territorial scale. It means that you would take all this nucleus of abandoned village and start a rehabilitation process that includes this whole nucleus of about 20-30 villages. And in order to make this connection between the villages visible and also realizable, the idea would be to add another kind of construction which would allow us to think about grafting itself on the existing building, to add new infrastructure, a new building complex that comes to complete, to extend, and to plug itself on the existing ones. To this end, reflection around vernacular materials. So here in this region we're speaking about stone, we're speaking about which have really a long tradition in the Basque culture and in the regional context, is undertaken. But also, in addition, compressed raw earth, so the technique of tabia we have been experimenting today with the students, as you can see some example here, is seen here as a very interesting complementary technique because of its versatility on one side, and also because of its living and ecological qualities. So the idea would be to work with the vernacular materials and the ground earth technique. In this way, the abandoned structures that form the Rurapolis will be reinforced by logistical and cultural platforms, I call them for the moment platforms, and buildings, which could be, in one scenario, could be meeting places, it could be extensions of urban concrete habitats, which would extend the organic and the earthly dimension of the project. So which would take out of the ground some new architecture that would complete the urban villages. And so now I come quickly to the intervention on site. We will be doing in Egüés with the students in the next days, because the idea of this lecture was also to introduce the work we're going to do in the next days. Because in this more extended territorial project, which is very theoretic, the one I exposed right now, it's almost an utopian vision of what would be an alternative suburban construction. I propose to build a real prototype to work with the materiality of earth, to experience the idea of reactivation of an abandoned village by spending simply time there, and finally create a small prototype within a few days. So it can only be a small structure because we don't have so much time to create it. And the idea also of this architecture is not only to build, but also to create a moment of being together, a collective moment of gathering in this abandoned village, which is not alive anymore since a very long time, in the case of Egüés since the 1960s. The event I mentioned at the beginning would be like the inauguration of the structure that we will do on next Thursday, on the 8th. Would be the physical, cultural event that would make us feel alive in these ruins and in this depopulated village, and would make like maybe this idea of Rurapolis, which is very not anchored in the reality until now, would be make it more realistic. The chosen village among the many other villages that are studied in the last months is Egüés. Just because Egüés is an abandoned village which is located in a natural reserve that belongs to the municipality of the Valle, and it has been chosen among the other villages because it's the nearest from Pamplona, so for practical reason it was easiest to do, and also because it's an interesting point that it's still related to the public transport system, and so in terms of infrastructure, I found it very interesting. And so here, in order to understand the work we're going to do with the students, I show a more technical sketch made for the purpose of obtaining permits from the municipality of the Egüés, and also to calculate the volumes of earth we will need on site, and also to make the drawing of the formwork, which is like the starting point of the tabia technique, have a good and resisting formwork. So you have to imagine that this little architecture would be one of the milestones located along the network of paths, of railways and of roads of this future Rurapolis. And you have to imagine that you would have multiple and evolving functionality in the future. For example, this microarchitecture, which is basically a floor and a wall, could become at the beginning an isolated stage for one cultural event, like we're going to do next Thursday, in a natural rural environment. But it could, over time, if the Rurapolis idea progress, become, and with the reactivation also of the village next to it, and the evolution of the climate also, it could become an open air venue, an amphitheater, or the completion of a future building, etc. So this structure created from materials that come from the ground itself are grafted onto the existing rooms, and they would evolve with the territorial development of the Rurapolis. So with this technique of the garment earth, you can start to begin to imagine a repair of the existing, an extension, and new minimal structures. Now to the prototype that has been proposed for the Summerschool. The one interesting reference that maybe for the people from abroad is not very evident is the figure of the fronton, which is a very structuring figure in the Basque culture, both sacrally and also socially. The fronton is a key architectural element in the spatial construction of the Basque villages, and it's basically also a wall with a floor in front of it that was traditionally located in the village square, adjoining or using the church wall itself. So in this case of this single fronton, it's not the case, but in many other examples you can have a fronton which is part of the church wall. This fronton has been designed for the use of a play which is called the Basque Pelota, maybe you know it. The fronton is a generic architecture and is in itself a simple masonry wall, often made of local stones, placed at the end of a flat rectangular area, measuring approximately, in most of the cases, 10 to 30 meters. And examples of frontons are very numerous, very different in terms of size, of shape, of texture, of color and finish. And they vary in each community, in each town, in each valley or village. So the recreational and social use of the fronton is enhanced by its cultural meaning and by the identity it gives to each villages. This very simple and seemingly modest architecture is here monumentalized by the role that is assigned to it and in its own right. As a recurring and symbiotic figure in the abandoned village I visited in the last months, this fronton, this architecture confers to a desolated and neglected area, a neglected landscape, by its very presence, like a solitary totem, a timeless and almost sacred character. So for me, it really transforms the void. It delimits the space into a presence that conduits to a human, social and cultural appropriation. And in many cases, the fronton in these abandoned villages, like in this example of Aritzagun, the fronton is the only architecture that remains used since the abandonment of the village, because people come back there to play or to use it for different kinds of gatherings. So it's the only architecture that stays that doesn't give this image of room compared to the houses that really fall apart. So in this line, the object created as a physical and real introduction to the field of analysis of the Rurapolis would be a kind of repetition of this frontis in its simplicity. It's also, I take it also a little bit as an argument, but I think it could work quite good in the continuity of the frontal model. And it allows us to realize a simple prototypal architecture within a few days, charged with a meaning that extrapolates the form and the mere presence in this territory. So the idea with this new added architecture is to make polis, it means to make the city, and to demonstrate the feasibility of the Rurapolis through the collective self-construction of a small, new and unifying monument in the middle of an abandoned village. And here, just to finish, some other examples of intervention that have been made by other architects and that can be quite similar to the action we want to do here in the framework of the Rurapolis. With this example by Martino Pedrozzi, a Swiss architect, that also worked on the cultural and identitary setting linked to an emblematic element of the rural heritage and to also the idea of sociability. In our case, it would be by invoking the figure of the Basque fronton. And here, in the work of Martino Pedrozzi, he takes the rustico, which is the former pasture house and integrated in the long-term process that he is leading since 30 years that he called the Ricomposizione. So in the Ticino Alps, in the southern Switzerland, he started to recover former rusticos that fell apart, ruins of rusticos, which are like small one-story or single-story buildings structured around a wooden frame with a wooden form and a massive dry stone envelope and a slate roof. So this typical construction from this region of the Alp mountains were used during the summer months, during the spring months, and also due to the rural exodus were simply not used anymore and fell apart. Today, due to the changes also in agricultural production and the livestock breeding, these architectural objects have fallen into disuse and are now a feature in the Alpine landscape. You can see very often when you go up in the mountain for wandering. And Martino Pedrotti chose to make a reactivation process departing from this rustico also in a landscape architecture point of view, in order to give back to this territory its heritage. He became interested in them in 1994 and began to recompose them, rearrange them, like you can see here in this picture. So working with the stone from the dry stone envelope of the rusticos in a very sculptural manner around the perimeter of the sides of each house, creating an abstract and typological volume that pays tribute to a lost heritage. Pedrotti is a professor at the School of Architecture of Mendrisio, and he integrates this process of recomposition, like he calls this, into a pedagogical program where several times in the last years, groups of students, up to 100 students, climbed the mountain pastures of here from the Valle to participate in workshop of symbolic reconstruction. After several hours of walking to this remote territory in the middle of nature, moving and recutting stones to recreate geometric volumes that take up the initial imprint of the ground of each collapsed building. So these recomposizioni are a tribute to a vanished way of civilization, questioning our current vision of the territory. Through this effort, through the displacement also of such an amount of people, or the displacement also of the stones, once cut by hand by the peasants of Ticino, of this region of Switzerland, the landscape is again transformed by a simple and sculptural architectural gesture, repeated several times with patience and resilience, with no function, here in this case, other than its cultural and heritage dimension. So we are here really in the limits between the kind of land art gesture and the architectural gesture. And to finish, another example of the emblematic recovery of a rural figure, the work entitled Super Calvin by the architects collective from France, Encore Heureux. This architecture marks the territory and anchors it into a space-time which places the focus back again on lost modes and uses. So here we are also speaking about dry stone architecture, like in the former example. It has been produced in 2020 in the Occitanie region of France, on the pilgrim ways to Santiago de Compostela, like we have it here in Pamplona, the past a little bit before in France. And this collective, the collective Encore Heureux, describes it like this gesture as both a work of art and a refuge. To my eyes, it has three interesting aspects that can be put in relation with the Rurapolis platform project. First, it proposed the reinvention of vernacular heritage for the future, so working with traditional materials that are reintegrated into contemporary architecture, taking up a phenomenon that marks out the path of the region, which is really placed on a youth path of the pilgrims of Santiago de Compostela, and taking out also this idea that you find on the pilgrim path of these piles of stones that wanderers put in order to orientate themselves. So they take out this phenomenon that punctuates the landmass, as well as the emblematic figure of the dolmen. So this is an ancestral construction method that consists of piling up stones without mortar to create massive and almost immovable walls if they respect the concepts of the local craftsmen that participated to the construction work also here. So the idea was also to reintegrate this craftsmanship which is getting, which is disappearing also like the villages we were talking about. In this region, these craftsmen are called the losier. So the idea was to work with this losier and to reintegrate their technique into a contemporary architecture. Secondly, this architectural creation is the result of a participative process and also of an anthropological analysis of the territory in order to adapt it to the required uses. The Super Cairo is, as I said before, a refuge, serving as a bivouac for the pilgrims, as well as a place of observation and meeting for the locals. And so you can see here in this shape the preparation of this farm, which is the result of a participative process with the local inhabitants and other people who wanted to participate to the creation of this refuge. And finally, the building designed according to this participative process has been also built collectively in an idea of, as I was saying before, transmitting traditional know-how, thus creating a sustainable movement between a remote corner of the territory and also more populated areas. And here another image of this building which won an architecture prize in 2008. And so as a conclusion, I'm going to repeat now the problematic I exposed at the beginning of this presentation, which was the question if we have the right as architects to continue to plan peripheral spaces and extensions of the cities in the territory as we do it right now, or on the contrary, if we should think about another development models, not only in terms of settlements, but also in terms of construction methods of one-to-one scale,